There are so many calisthenics skills out there to learn, and that is by far why calisthenics is the best way to train. However, with the emergence of social media and all these fitness apps and flashy workouts, everything's become overcomplicated. People are trying to find the new workout or the new exercise that's going to draw heaps of attention and just kind of look really flashy for views. So the whole industry, while we're giving value to people, we're also severely overcomplicating it. So if you want to unlock any skill really, whether it's a tuck planche or as far as a human flag, full planche, front lever, dragon flag, every single skill comes down to 3 simple steps that you want to break down. I've been training calisthenics for 6 years, unlocked majority of advanced skills, and worked with some of the top athletes in Australia and even across the world. And obviously seen some pretty crazy skills on a lot of these athletes. And the best part about it, whatever skill you are wanting to learn, it can be broken down into literally these 3 simple steps, and it is foolproof. So be sure to watch the video to the end, as well as that final tip is a huge game changer for you. And I'm not just saying that as well, but let's get stuck into it. So the first thing we're wanting to do is build the movement pattern specific to the skill that you're trying to attain. And that essentially involves building the foundations, which I'm sure we've all known before. However, we're obviously making sure it's specific to that skill. So for instance, if we're building up our planches, we're looking at the movement pattern and the muscle group that's involved. So obviously our shoulders are doing majority of the work, but the movement that we're doing is actually shoulder flexion. So we're moving essentially up. Obviously we're holding, but we're resisting this movement. So that's the movement we're going to try and want to build up. And that's obviously going to involve kind of push-ups, but progressing them a little bit more to obviously working toward pike push-ups, elevated pike push-ups, wall handstand push-ups, and even working toward a handstand push-up is gonna build that movement pattern specific to the planche. And we can do that obviously for every skill. You want to think front lever. What the front lever is doing is similar to the planche, but obviously the opposite movement. So this is shoulder extension. However, what's doing that movement is primarily our lats. So we want to think what's going to be doing that movement as a prime exercise or a foundation exercise. Pull-ups, rows. So building up our pull-ups with harder variations or working toward that obviously, as well as inverted rows. Front lever also has a little bit of that core and hip flexor involvement to hold your hips up in that position. So building the foundations with leg raises, working toward hanging knee raises, hanging leg raises, that's going to build that foundational strength. And if you're thinking dragon flags, pretty much very similar to a front lever, however with our elbows extended, so our triceps might be working a little bit. So maybe skull crushers or some different push-up exercises, variations will also help build toward that dragon flag. Cuban flags, we're doing one arm pull and one arm push. So obviously just building up our foundational push strength, and pull strength is going to help that. And you'll see a similarity here. A lot of the time, those foundational exercises set up a lot of later skills. So exercises like dips, rows, pull-ups, pike push-ups, and progressing those beyond that is going to set up a lot of those advanced skills that you're trying to work toward. And obviously further adding to that, especially with a lot of push skills, there's a massive balance component, whether you're doing handstand push-ups, planches, 90-degree push-ups. Almost every kind of push exercise has some form of balance control, somewhat more, somewhat less. So if you want a word of advice, start training your handstands and prioritizing that as much as you possibly can, as it's going to set up majority of your push skills for sure. And the earlier you can get that handstand, the more you can just really prioritize the strength, and the balance side of things will come so much easier. Me personally, I got into it during COVID, and I swear to God, I smashed handstands when I was playing COD, Xbox, or studying at uni during COVID, literally doing it probably like 4 or 5 times a day, but just broken up into very short sessions. So essentially greasing the groove. Not everyone can do that, but I promise you, just getting that frequency in, even if they're very short sessions, change the game for you. So the second step now, guys, is actually the regressions and that progressive overload. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the easiest variation that's going to build up the skill and the technique for that end skill that you're trying to obtain. So obviously with a full planche, for instance, or a front lever, what we're trying to do is find that easiest variation to learn the technique or the movement pattern specific to that skill. So while we're building the foundations, this is essentially the secondary focus that we want to try and do. And as we start to get closer to the skill, this will become your main focus. So every single skill that you're trying to learn has regressions that you want to try and work through. And essentially all it involves is manipulating joint angles to make it easier on the movement that you're trying to obtain. So obviously we've got tuck planches, and then what you do is you manipulate your joint angles to slightly make it harder and harder and harder each time. And that's the same for front levers, dragon flags, human flags. It's just about leveraging your legs or positions of your body to increase the lever and increase the difficulty. Some exercises are about manipulating body's assistance. So you can go from pike push-ups to elevated to wall. And what that's doing is just slowly placing more and more load and using less and less assistance. Same thing with one arm pull-ups. If you're trying to work toward them, you go from pull-ups to side pull-ups to archer pull-ups to banded pull-ups to one arm pull-ups. So either manipulating joint angles to increase the lever of exercise or slowly using less and less assist. But every skill is mostly the same. And then from there, essentially you're just progressively increasing the difficulty as you start to build strength until more or less you end up getting the skill. However, there is a lot more to that, which we're going to touch on in that next point. So it's one thing to understand the foundations and the progressions, and I think most people have an okay grasp at that. They probably get some parts of it wrong, but I think that's technically or majorly done well. This is the aspect that I think everyone gets wrong. And what I really do recommend, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think getting guidance for this process does help. And very quickly, before I give you probably the 4 most important tips that are going to be crucial for your programming, I do recommend getting guidance for that. If you want to invest in a coach and work very closely with me, you can do that. So that's the link below, or you can even jump in and get my programs and get the guidance through there in my community. So that is an option there if you want to. However, in terms of programming, we want to be optimizing strength, and following these 4 things is going to be a complete game changer for you. So the very first thing to optimize building that strength, firstly, rest times and rep ranges. So rest times, you want to be resting as much as you practically can. You're not doing drop sets, supersets, circuits, unless you're just so short of time. You want to rest practically as much as you can. I honestly, for my first exercises, I genuinely rest for like 6, 7, 8 minutes. Especially if it's like doing some really hard attempts. And I do recommend somewhat doing the same if you have the good hour and a half to 2 hours to do for that session. If you only have an hour, I do recommend about 3 minutes. However, when you are training quite maximally, you almost want that full 5 minutes, to be honest with you. I know if I go for a full max effort set and I'm only doing 3 minutes, fuck, I'm absolutely buggered. And obviously for rep ranges, you want to be working mostly in those lower rep ranges. So for repetition-based movements, you want to be doing 1 to 6 rep ranges. You can work up to like 10 to 15 to build a little bit more conditioning at the start. And I think if you're just very beginner and foundational level, I think there is some advantage to doing a little bit of that more of a focus. However, once you are at it, kind of like the end stages of beginner to intermediate, go all in on strength. 1 to 6 rep range stuff is so important. You want to be building obviously the strength and conditionings in your muscles, but you have to be firing our nervous system. And that's where we build most of our strength. You see those big bodybuilders, obviously they're absolutely yoked and they are okay strong, but powerlifters are a lot stronger than them, and they're nowhere near as big. And that's because their central nervous system is by and large so much stronger and just able to fire and recruit all those muscles and those motor units. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with calisthenics. It's a little bit more skill focused, a bit more technique. That CNS is so important to fire. And we're only training those in those lower rep ranges, in those 1, 2, 3 rep ranges, somewhat up to about 6 as well. And for holds, obviously that's a little bit different. I tend to program for clients about a 4 to 7 second hold range for their harder skills, and then doing some kind of 6 to 10 second holds as well, depending on what the focus is, whether we're trying to build a little bit more technique, conditioning, or whether we're trying to go really hard and get that central nervous system firing, which I was talking about. So that would be closer to those 4 to 6 second holds. Somewhere around 4 to 10 seconds is going to be great for you. And the second key tip for programming, prioritizing your hardest movements first. This is so incredibly important. You want to be as fresh as you possibly can for those first exercises. So doing the hardest skill based stuff, things that require a lot of balance, control, and a lot of strength at the same time, you want to be doing those first, especially if that's your main priority. Like you want to be able to do a handstand push-up, you want to be doing some like handstand push-up negatives or some really hard vertical presses, whether that's a pike push-up for you, which is incredibly difficult, or some form of handstand push-up variation. And whatever skill that may be, if that's your main priority, train the hardest variation. And then as you go through, you want to think, okay, so that's the hardest skill. Then I can do some more strength focused stuff that's kind of more foundations, maybe some like weighted dips or pull-ups or some form of variation. And then you think conditioning last, where you're doing maybe some accessory stuff. So always hardest exercise first, second most important, that's a bit more strength focused, and then conditioning if you are doing some of that more stuff too. Obviously not talking about warm-ups. Make sure you're doing your warm-ups and activation stuff first. I'm just talking most of your working sets. The third tip for programming is training frequency and making sure you're training those key exercises multiple times a week, twice a week, potentially even 3 or 4 with some variations, depending on how big your sessions are and how many total sets and total exercises for that skill you're doing. But the more frequent you're training, generally the better, as long as you're able to recover from it. And obviously, depending on how much you've been training, depending on how good your conditioning and your experience is, that's going to be slightly more for some if you are experienced, and a little bit less if you're not used to it. So listening to your body, and I think that's why getting the coach probably does help, but definitely just listening to your body, making sure you're not overtraining and you are able to recover from it. But essentially, you want to train as frequently as you can, as a high intensity as you can. So frequency and intensity, you want to have that as high as possible, but that also means you have to be recovering as much as possible. So finding that balance between frequency and intensity is pretty much the bang for your buck in terms of programming. And if you can get that right, that's what the best coaches in the world do. They find that balance between frequency, intensity, and being able to recover from it. The fourth tip is being smart and realizing that you have a strength carryover effect. So training for a front lever, for instance, is going to build up your dragon flag. So you do not have to be training every single skill to unlock that skill. Human flags, for instance, has a combination of a shoulder flexion strength and obviously a shoulder extension strength. So there's a push and a pull element. So training toward a front lever and a planche, or a handstand push-up and a one-arm pull-up, is going to get you very, very close to a human flag. I got unlocked the human flag as well as a dragon flag, never actually training for it. Never once trained for it at all. And I was just able to do it. And that's because you do get a strength carryover effect. And that's why building the foundations is so important, like I touched on the first step, as well as obviously working through those progressions correctly. But if you have all these skills you want to tick off, don't stress. Your body's very smart and resilient, and you do get some strength carryover. And even if you may not be able to do a human flag immediately, when you do want to introduce it, you may not have unlocked it immediately, but doing it for like a 6-week training block, you get it very, very quick if you're already at an intermediate advanced level 2. So don't stress, train smart, pick the few key skills you want to focus on, build the foundational exercises, you will unlock it, I promise you. And the fifth tip, I don't know, did I say 4? I think I might have said 4, but this is 5. I've got 5. And the fifth one's a little bit more not in terms of the training side of things, but it is optimizing your recovery. And I'm sorry to say this, and it doesn't mean you have to do like ice baths, saunas, and massage guns, and all of this foam rolling shit. That's not exactly what it's about. If that helps you recover and you feel great doing it, by all means do it. All I'm essentially talking about is stress management, reducing your overall cortisol levels. Sleep is so incredibly important, and diet. So diet, stress, and sleep, and whatever helps you optimize and get the most out of those 3 is so important. And that's obviously going to include socializing, being around loved ones, being out in nature, things that just generally make you feel good and de-stress you. I promise you is the biggest thing for your strength gains. Getting on top of my mental health has drastically improved, obviously my whole life in general, but my recoverability has skyrocketed. I don't drink alcohol anymore, really. I've had 1 drink this year. I can't emphasize how much has changed everything for me in terms of my strength gains. My whole life in general has changed, but my strength gains has been phenomenal from it. So to sum everything up, all you really have to do is build the foundations, work through the progressions when you are ready for it to build the technique, and then just make sure you're programming correctly. And if you need help with that, suss the link in my bio or rewatch the video, make some notes, see what you can do. Either way, I really hope this helped. Let me know what skills you're trying to work on in the comments. I'd love to see where you guys are at, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. All the best, guys.